1 in 3 women globally, and this is a WHO stat, now has bacterial vaginosis, and this is a infection that's kind of when you have vaginal dysbiosis. So your microbiome has been knocked out of its kind of natural equilibrium. And as uncomfortable as that is in and of itself, so 1 in 3 women get it, over 58% of those who get it and are treated for it will experience recurrence, because still the gold standard of treatment is antibiotics. And that's obviously just not good enough. It's not modern enough. We need to have better options.
Welcome back to Biohacking Eve, Health Optimization for Women with Judith Miller, where we shine a light on everything that will help you reach your best self as a woman, as unique and individual as only you can be. Live long and prosper, my friend. And we're back for another episode. Today we have Lucy Hope with us.
Hi. Lovely to be here. Thank you for having me, Judith.
We'll touch on the topic in a minute, but I think your surname, Hope, is very fitting for what you do. I'm sure you're told that a lot of times.
No, I haven't been actually. It's the first time.
Okay, well,
yes.
Okay. Lucy Hope is a FemTech founder and health tech innovator who's on a mission to reimagine women's health. She's starting with the vaginal microbiome, so there's an unusual one. She's the founder of the Daughters of Mars, a company developing the world's first bioactive prebiotic tampon designed to nourish and protect the vaginal ecosystem, which is a major blind spot in menstrual care until now. And Lucy believes that tampons could become one of the most exciting tools of female biohacking if we rethink what they're truly capable of. Why do you think that is? Tell us about the vaginal microbiome. Why is it important? And how is it actually different to other microbiomes?
Yes, so this is really interesting, and there's so much exciting and emerging science associated with the vaginal microbiome. So it's essentially a self-regulating ecosystem, but its power and its kind of impact is huge. So it plays a really critical role in immunity, fertility, and reproductive health. So kind of similar to other microbiomes across the body, it's a community of microbes that can protect, balance, and communicate with the immune and reproductive systems. It's obviously somewhat neglected compared to, say, like the gut or the skin microbiome, which is having, it's very zeitgeist at the moment. It's as complex, but it's hardly ever discussed when talking about biohacking or how we can kind of improve our health. And what I find most interesting about the vaginal microbiome is, obviously, we know in the gut and skin microbiome, diversity is associated with a healthy microbiome, whereas actually in the vaginal microbiome, one that is low in diversity is actually associated with best health, and so it's dominated by the lactobacillus bacteria. And yeah, that's kind of the main difference, I would say, between the knowledge that people are now gaining thanks to all the research that's coming out there and gut and skin health. The vaginal microbiome, actually, you want one that's just kind of dominated by one kind of species of bacteria, which is lactobacillus. And the other kind of really interesting part of this is that the vaginal microbiome actually makes up about 9% of a woman's total bodily microbiome. So that's enormous, really, when you think about it. It's nearly 10%. And normally it's quite self-regulating, but really modern life is having quite a detrimental impact on the vaginal microbiome and causing a vast increase in vaginal infections. So when the microbiome is disrupted, which can be disrupted by simple things such as just having a bikini wax or, stress. There's a lot of science emerging that stress, medications that we're taking, the kind of clothes that we wear. So synthetic plastic gym wear, for example, that, people tend to sit around doing all day these days, washed in synthetic detergents with perfumes in there. All of these things can really disrupt the vaginal microbiome. And so what that means now is that 1 in 3 women globally, and this is a WHO stat, now has BV or will be affected by BV, so bacterial vaginosis. And this is a infection that's kind of when you have vaginal dysbiosis. So your microbiome has been knocked out of its kind of natural equilibrium. And as uncomfortable as that is in and of itself, so 1 in 3 women get it, over 58% of those who get it and are treated for it will experience recurrence, because still the gold standard of treatment is antibiotics. And that's obviously just not good enough. It's not modern enough. We need to have better options. So BV is something that really so many women are suffering from chronically. And actually more science is emerging, more research is coming out that it is now proven to be a risk factor if you have BV for increased risks of STIs and HIV, increased risk of ovarian cancer, infertility, miscarriage. So the humble vaginal microbiome actually is huge insofar as women's reproductive and gynecological health.
And you're basically saying that BV has become a chronic infection, not so much because it's chronic in and of itself, but because basically modern life has created the breeding ground as a way to make it chronic. And that's why
Exactly
you get recurrences.
that, yeah. Yes.
And how does it manifest? What are the symptoms?
So bacterial vaginosis, a lot of people actually don't know they've got it. They could have it without realizing. So that's a little bit terrifying. But more often than not, you will have discomfort. There would be kind of this notoriously fishy smell that's associated with having BV. But yeah, as I say, it's quite scary that actually it can get for a long time as undiagnosed. So it is one of those things that actually women would do well to start maybe having a test for.
How would you test for that?
Actually, there's a really exciting new diagnostic tampon from the fantastic company called Day, and they've actually brought out a tampon where you can test and can have a qPCR, so a complete characterization of your entire microbiome. And not only will it let you know whether you are lactobacillus dominant, which you would hope you are, it will also let you know whether you have any other kind of common gynae infections, which is really fantastic, really, because it's obviously a product that we're all familiar with already. And so, yeah, I'm very impressed with that particular product, just kind of like a really easy way to get that data about yourself.
We will make sure to include a link in the show notes. And what is causing BVs? You briefly touched on some of these. Can you talk us through how each of these work?
Yes. So a lot of things are affected by the fact that things are made from synthetic material. So take, for example, actually, a man's semen, for example, is alkaline, and a woman's environment needs to be acidic to be healthy. You know, that is the perfect pH for a woman, is to have an acidic pH. And so even just having intimate relationships with your partner or can be something that can cause this. So it really does feel like that almost anything in modern life can cause it. So as I say, it can be synthetic clothing and the detergents that are on it. Even your monthly hormones, so the drop in estrogen, for example, can allow you to develop a vaginal dysbiosis. And actually, that's what's so interesting is the time of the month. So when you're about to go on your period or have your period, is actually the moment of heightened vulnerability to developing BV, because not only is menstrual blood alkaline, but actually these hormonal fluctuations as well can allow these pathogenic bacteria to start to dominate.
And I think we previously touched on the fact it's not just the semen, but it's actually the surface of the penis as well.
Yeah, so this has been amongst some of the researchers into sexual health for a long time have basically classified BV as a sexual infection, but it was a very recent study that came out only a few weeks ago that actually did prove that if they had given the male that in the relationship antibiotics as well, that actually reduced the incidence of BV in women. But it's just not the solution. It's more antibiotics. And in terms of good antibiotic stewardship, the solution cannot be just more antibiotics. You know, there needs to be better ways to proactively care for your vaginal microbiome than obliterating it with antibiotics, which obviously causes the recurrence.
And makes other things worse as well, affects other microbiomes.
Absolutely.
Okay. So tell us about the history of the tampon.
Oh, well, this is absolutely fascinating. So the tampon was first patented over 90 years ago, so very early 30s, and first commercialized on the market as Tampax in 1933. So back then, it was made from, clean, compressed cotton. It was really a simple way of women to look after their menstruation. But as is the way, the industry quickly shifted towards, I guess, cost efficiency over safety. And apart from a very few exceptions, tampons have not changed much in terms of form or function over those last 90 years. And in fact, there's been a few experiments that were somewhat completely disastrous and detrimental to women's health. So, for example, in the 1970s, Procter & Gamble launched a tampon called the Rely tampon, and they'd made it with some synthetic materials, so it contained polyester and carboxyl methyl cellulose, and it absorbed so much fluid that they said you don't need to change it all day. In fact, it's so effective you can leave it in all day. But of course, that was just an absolute disaster. It disrupted the vaginal environment. It raised the pH, and it allowed some of these more pathogenic bacteria to absolutely thrive, absolutely proliferate. So particularly Staphylococcus aureus, which is produced this toxic shock syndrome toxin, TSST1, and even more so, it gave women ulcers in their vaginas because obviously it expanded. It was just absolutely disastrous. So by 1980, the CDC had reported over 800 cases of TSS associated with these particular tampons. And 38 women died because these tampons gave them toxic shock syndrome. So it was pulled from the market. But really, the industry hasn't still ever addressed the root issues. Tampons are being designed without the vaginal biology in mind. That's, it's just cheaper and cheaper materials all the time, no respect to vaginal health. So, yeah, instead of improving safety or comfort, or even thinking that this is an opportunity to be proactive and deliver proactive vaginal wellness, they're largely engineered for cost efficiency and very little regard for biological compatibility. So even today, the majority of tampons on the market are not made with organic cotton. They're made with rayon, bleached wood pulp, and plastics. And actually, shockingly, still in the UK, they are not regulated as medical devices. These are still consumer goods products. So they do not have to meet the standards of medical device, which is obviously something that we really want to change. And there are some other really good actors out there who are also voluntarily meeting the medical device standards. But yeah, even sort of things like they're promoting that these products have got fragrances in it, anti-odor agents. These are endocrine disrupting chemicals, and it's the most absorbent area of a woman's body. That vaginal environment is extremely absorbent. And fragrances, obviously, we know contain phthalates, these chemicals that forever chemicals persist in the environment, and yet they're still on the shelves. And the sad thing is that I do believe that women think that somebody out there somewhere might be looking after them and making sure that things meet certain standards. But unfortunately, no, they are not.
This is really interesting because we touched on ovarian cancer, etc., and then you made this connection to endocrine disrupting chemicals. So that's clearly one of the links. I think there's another one that you mentioned previously, is that the synthetic materials can actually cause micro tears on the vaginal wall, which obviously makes it's similar to leaky gut syndrome, just somewhere else on your body. You're absorbing all these things that you A, don't want to have for starters, and B, in actually vast amounts then. Okay, yes. So how do they cause micro tears? I wonder how that works on a sort of mechanical level.
A lot of the time, the materials themselves are the fibers shed, and also it's that just quite simple mechanics of friction. Putting them in and pulling them out can, in a very absorbent area, is kind of dragging. And so, yes, I think it's a mechanical thing, but also then you're involving kind of tampons that, some studies recently have shown contain metals, like heavy metals. I'm actually just referring to a study which was published last year in 2024, where they found detectable levels of about 16 heavy metals in tampons, including lead, arsenic, cadmium. And these were from a vast array of different brands, 30 different brands. And whilst the study was a bit flawed insofar as it didn't actually prove that these chemicals were able to leach out into the vagina, let's be honest, these chemicals shouldn't really be there in the first place. And, we know now, sort of in terms of textiles on our skin, we know that whatever, even just on our skin, which is less absorbent, that a lot of the chemicals they're putting on textiles, so dyes and whatever else to kind of have functionality, they absolutely are absorbing into our skin. And so we can really make the assumption that in the vaginal area, it's absorbed.
Don't quote me on this, but obviously you get a lot of the medications that are given topically. So you put them on as a cream, and the idea is that they sink in. And the statistic that I've read, but again, don't quote me on this, is that the body absorbs something like 70% of what you put onto it within 20 minutes. And that's just the skin. Again, we're not talking about the vaginal microbiome yet.
Exactly.
Coming back to these heavy metals, can you talk us through this in more detail?
Yes, so it was a study published in the Environmental International. And as I said, there was 16 heavy metals that were reported in them. So the research was led by scientists at the University of California, Columbia University and Michigan State University. And it was really the first time, again, somewhat shockingly, that an analysis had been conducted on menstrual products in this way. So as for the results, lead was detected in all tampon samples with higher concentrations in non-organic products. Arsenic was found in all samples with higher concentrations in organic tampons. Cadmium was also present across all the tested products. So it's really interesting because, you might not be adding these chemicals themselves, but if this is cotton that's being grown in the ground where these metals are in the soil, or it's the organic cotton's being grown on land that's next to non-organic cotton, you cannot stop the uptake of these metals that are going into the cotton. And so that's why there needs to be rigorous batch testing on every single batch that makes sure that these cotton batches aren't containing these heavy metals.
So how would you, as a producer, as a consumer, how would you make sure you don't have any of these issues? As long as you're using tampon, is there any way to get around these? Is it just quote unquote regulation stricter testing, or is there something inherent with tampons that means there's a problem?
It's a really interesting point. And yes, the answer is absolutely. These can be made to a much higher standard. These can be made and tested and ensure that they are not containing these materials. So yeah, as I say, in the UK, this might have to be a voluntary thing for now, but actually the tests are there. You can test to see whether these materials are in tampons. For a start, it would be helpful if we could ban things like plastics and fragrances from tampons that are known to be disrupting. But actually, women are responding. So certainly when I'm doing my research and customer discovery research, so many women are like, oh God, tampons, no, I wouldn't want to touch one now. Whereas, when I was growing up, that was the option. Everybody, my mum gave me my first box of tampons and that was what all my friends used. And I'm a millennial, so I've stuck to that. I still use tampons. But as I say, women are responding. In the UK, tampon sales have dropped 12% over 5 years. And in the USA, they have dropped 16% because rightly so, there is growing cynicism, mistrust, and a sense that, these menstrual products are being neglected in terms of like the standards, and the industry is maligned because they're not prioritizing transparency or innovation or safety. So someone's got to change it.
And I think you said it's 75.4 million tampons per month that are being used in the UK. So that's more than we have people, actually, just to put that into perspective, right?
Yeah.
Because you need several of them per month for those who are not familiar with the subject.
Course. And just think about that can either be 75.4 million ways of actually just, affecting negatively your microbiome, or it could be 75.4 lost opportunities to do something proactive to protect and support your vaginal health, which when we realise the kind of how important the microbiome is and its wide-reaching effects on our bodies as women, I do think that's the way things should go.
So coming back to my previous question, also using this as a segue. So my previous question was obviously, as a tampon producer, how are you making sure you don't have these heavy metals, you don't have these products? Because obviously, as we said, it is difficult to actually produce that. And then the other thing, so basically, how are you taking out the bad stuff, but also how you're putting in the good stuff, as it were?
Yes. So great question. So we have volunteered to manufacture all of our products. We're developing, obviously, tampons that have a bioactive coating, and we're manufacturing and testing to the ISO standard medical device standards. So we're doing all of our safety and biocompatibility studies that a medical device should be kind of held to account for. So really, obviously, sticking to those regulations and doing all those testing is possible to test every batch to check that there aren't endocrine disrupting chemicals in there, that there aren't the heavy metals. And yes, it's just that kind of, as a woman, wanting to make a product that I feel really proud of wouldn't be to the detriment of other women. And so it's really been a really important aspect of developing this product for me that, we could have not necessarily had to do all this very expensive biocompatibility and safety testing, but it's just absolutely crucial. How can women are losing trust? I want women to trust this product. I really want it to be able to help and affect and in as many people as possible in a really positive way. And so I need to find a way to rehabilitate the tampon in people's kind of like the collective consciousness so that people aren't thinking that it could just be any old thing in there. So it really is just a case of actually being really transparent, really honest, setting the bar really, really high. And that would be a way to kind of make sure that women feel safe enough to kind of maybe go back to the tampons, because obviously there are alternatives emerging on the market. But take, for example, like an explosion in period pants. For that to be something that holds in the blood and so it doesn't leak, there will inevitably have to be some sort of plastic layer, again, being held next to a very absorbent, sensitive area. And a lot of these period knicker products, they've got antimicrobial coatings on. So these are biocides. They all advertising this as if it's like a really positive USP that they've got this antimicrobial layer. Well, actually, the majority of those are metal-based, chemicals that are on a list called the Biocidal Products Register, and they're on there because they're either harmful to human, animal, or environmental health. You're not allowed to make those antimicrobial claims unless they are on that list of toxic chemicals, which is kind of like the kind of weird irony of regulations that, this list exists to sustainably manage the use of these toxic chemicals. But once you're on that list, you can kind of obviously grow your business with impunity and kind of sell it to as many textile manufacturers as possible. But the more that there is, the more worrying it gets. Antimicrobial textiles is going to be a $20 billion industry by the end of this decade. That's scary, because knowing what those chemicals are and there being more and more of them in the environment, it's not good for any of us, women or men.
What are other alternatives currently on the market?
So we've developed an alternative now. We have a very natural, completely non-toxic. Caffeine has a higher toxicity level than our coating, and it is a way of actually targeting the pathogenic bacteria whilst leaving the commensal beneficial bacteria alone. It's a really clever coating that we've developed, and we've been developing since over a decade, and that's a fantastic alternative. But again, you have to say, well, let's put this on this Biocidal Products Register, and it's £1 million to get it registered. And, the status quo is that these chemical manufacturers don't really want anybody out there disrupting their very lucrative businesses. And so they make it hard. Obviously, we're saying, well, actually, we shouldn't be on this biocides list because as a first principle, we're not toxic or harmful. So why should we be lumped on this list? But it's very much a case of the regulators saying, well, we don't invent the regulations, we just police them. And computer says no.
Error.
Terrifying.
Does not compute. Okay. So coming back to, as a consumer looking at the market, so we said tampons are out, period pants, the new ones are out as well. Then you've got panty liners, and you've got the whole plastic problem. So I'm not even going to go into that.
Yeah.
And then you have menstrual cups as well, which to me never really sounded, yes, in theory you can sanitize them, but to me it just didn't sound like something that I want to reliably have in my body for a long time. Even if I can sanitize, I can't see it. So how do I know it's actually clean?
Yes. I do think that tampons are really still a very brilliant option. They just need to be made from better materials, and that's exactly what we're here to do. And there are other brands on the market who have held themselves to that high account. There are some really good disruptor brands out there. But the big players, the three main manufacturers of tampons on the market, they're not going to kind of give away market share easily, and they're not going to volunteer to make things from more expensive materials when they're still selling. So I do think that tampons are still a great option. Pads are, as you say, it's still got that same problem as far as there's kind of some of the chemicals in there that are absorbing the menstrual blood are questionable. There's some brilliant ones out there that are just made from organic cotton, but nonetheless, women are just thinking, I might just free bleed at this juncture.
The new world.
Exactly.
I'm sure that lives at some point in humanity. So coming back to TSS, look, I'm the kind of person who reads the label, and when you get these little packaging things, when you open it, just a quote-unquote standard pack of tampons that you've grown up with, and that says, do not leave in for more than whatever it is, 8 hours, and TSS, I'm like, I've never heard of it. I don't know what it does, what it looks like. I never met anyone with it, so surely it can't be that big of a problem. So question number one is, what does that actually look like? As in, how do you know you do have TSS? And the other questions I have actually not paid attention to that one is, I've been using organic tampons, and again, obviously you know much better if they're the right brand, etc., etc. But I've used from the local organic market, etc., the best I could find as aware. And I do not remember there seeing a label with a warning on TSS. I don't know if I just blinkered them out because obviously I've been doing this for 20 years, but I just didn't pay attention. Or whether the label wasn't there, or whether it wasn't necessary because the product is so great.
All tampons have to carry the TSS warning, so it might have been somewhere a little bit more hidden, but it will have been on that box. Otherwise, they aren't producing them to existing regulations. So even in the UK, that has to be on every single box of tampons. No one gets away with it, even if they're making it from premium materials. And that is the fallout from that problem we had in the 70s and 80s with the Procter & Gamble Rely tampon. So now that warning has to be on every single box. TSS is thankfully a lot less common than it was back then, but what you will find is that it takes over kind of a lot like a fever, and that's the symptoms. Is you kind of get this unexplained fever, really can come on quite quickly, and you really are very ill. and then obviously, it can develop into sepsis and all sorts of other things. So that is why they still have on all the packets, really should be changing between every 4 and 8 hours, even if they are, we were thinking about this because obviously we're making ours with better materials, and actually there's a coating on there that absolutely acts directly on Staphylococcus aureus. Should we be making, say, claims that perhaps TSS wouldn't be so much of a risk with our tampons? We've decided categorically that that's not really a risk that we want to take because, we do think they should be changed every 4 to 8 hours anyway, even with better materials, because it's preventative for any kind of risk. So yeah, that should be on your box.
Okay, I'll go and check. I'll be back in 5. Okay, so that's that on TSS. Let's have a chat about, actually no, you mentioned previously that the vaginal microbiome is critical to fertility, long-term gynecological health, which all makes sense, and immunity. How does that come in there?
So interesting. So your vaginal microbiome and your vaginal mucosa is the first line of defense in your vagina to protect you from infection. So, the good bacteria in there, let's say the Lactobacillus, that is there to competitively outcompete any pathogenic bacteria that might decide it wants to grow and kind of cause issues. So that's why it is very similar to like vaginal immunity as a thing, and you can have good or bad vaginal immunity, and that is based on whether you've got a good level of certain proteins that are present in your vaginal mucosa. So that would be like lactoferrin, lysozyme, and others, and also that you've got this dominant Lactobacillus microbiome that's kind of lactic acid causing, it keeps it acidic, keeps the pH perfect, that also therefore the bacteria, let's say the kind of pathogenic bacteria such as Gardnerella, don't thrive when it's a nice acidic environment. And when obviously the Lactobacillus is there to outcompete the Gardnerella and keep it in check. So it's like a police type state.
So sticking with lactoferrin, this is super interesting because I personally have come across lactoferrin as a gut health treatment. So I use a course twice a year just to make sure I balance my microbiome, etc. The gut microbiome, that is. The reason I'm asking you this because you're actually director of Veristatic Shield and you actually have a supplement featuring lactoferrin. So I never associated lactoferrin with, the vaginal microbiome because actually I have seen it in toothpaste. I believe my toothpaste actually includes that as well. And I was wondering where that came from. So talk us more about the wonders of lactoferrin.
So I am absolutely obsessed with lactoferrin and have been researching it for a very, very long time. It's a game changer. So just to kind of start off, yes, it's quite well known in gut health spaces, but not really given how powerful it is. It's basically present in all of your natural mammalian secretions. So it's in your tears, it's in your saliva, it's in your upper respiratory tract. And your lactoferrin exists there as like your first line of defense to protect you against infection. So it has a direct antibacterial effect, but it also supports your own immune system. So it's kind of levels of lactoferrin will increase in your body when you're under attack from a pathogenic bacteria. And yeah, it's really excellent at managing your gut health. It's kind of like a prebiotic function in a way that it promotes the good bacteria, but has a kind of effect on the bad bacteria. And I'm absolutely obsessed with all the research that's coming out about that, not just in terms of gut health, but actually there's been studies that show that taking even enteric coated supplement that's been covered in a acid resistant coating, you can take a lactoferrin supplement and actually that will positively affect your vaginal microbiome. And there's been studies that show that actually it has real promise in preventing you getting bacterial vaginosis just from taking it orally, which is incredible. And that enteric coated capsule, that was in a Japanese study, but also there's been quite a lot of studies trialing vaginal pessaries containing about anywhere between 1 and 200 mg of lactoferrin for 10 days. And it absolutely was very good at decreasing bacteria associated with BV, so Gardnerella, Prevotella, and therefore increasing the presence of the really beneficial Lactobacillus. And actually, after the group that took 200 mg of this, so that was a 200 mg pessary, this actually improved the bacterial balance of their microbiome for up to 2 weeks post-treatment. So it wasn't even something that they had to continue. It had a lasting effect. There is a trial on at the moment now in the UK, led by the fantastic Dr. Philip Hay, who's our clinical champion at the Daughters of Mars. He's running a trial now on vaginal lactoferrin pessaries in UK women to see its effect on bacterial vaginosis. So it's really exciting that it seems to be having an effect both administered vaginally, but also orally. It's exciting. Lactoferrin is wonderful.
And you're saying it's a protein.
So lactoferrin is a protein. We make our own. Humans make their own lactoferrin, but it's present in bovine milk. And that's largely what most of the supplements on the market, including my supplement, is made from premium cow's milk. Lactoferrin kind of extracted from premium grass-fed cow's milk. And actually, some studies show that taking bovine lactoferrin and its character is actually more effective than taking human recombinant lactoferrin. So it's amazing that the kind of this milk scenario where, mother's milk and milk being kind of this thing that when you take when you're younger and it builds your immune system, it's actually very true that Mother Nature is providing us with these absolutely incredible molecules that are really vital to keeping both, keeping you well gut and vaginally. But actually, more so, it's got even more wider ranging effects than just that. So it's my personal game changer. It's more and more research is showing it supports insulin regulation, reduces inflammation. It's a natural prebiotic. And even a recent study, well, say recent, it was about in the early 2010s, I can't remember the exact date, but it was a randomized control trial of 300 mg a day of bovine lactoferrin. It reduced visceral fat, it reduced body weight, and it lowered the BMI in the participants compared to the control. So that's actually really exciting when you think about a lot of things to do with hormonal health and kind of growing obesity in not just the UK, but obviously around the world. So it's an anti-inflammatory, it's antimicrobial. It's also a really effective way of gently delivering iron around your body as well. So I take it regularly, obviously, because I've got a supplement on the market, Immune Shield by Virustatic Shield. But it's absolutely game-changing in it giving me energy. I just noticed the biggest difference ever when I started taking that, in that I must have been iron deficient and not really realising it. And, it's just such a really promising, exciting molecule. I absolutely love it. And its effects, as I say, not just in oral health, which, as you rightly point out, there is a lot of applications in oral health and in toothpaste, etc. But I do think it's a promising molecule in female biohacking for sure.
And I think as a biohacker, many of us are prone to saying we hear something is amazing and then we just go and take it. Obviously, if you're talking about iron delivery, you don't want to be deficient. As women, we tend to be more prone to be deficient. We also do not want to have too much of it because that's toxic. How would you go about testing for that? How would you go about taking it under different scenarios, etc.?
It's really interesting. So the studies have shown that lactoferrin helps your body absorb iron more effectively, so you don't have to rely on these heavier iron ferrous type supplements that kind of are really hard to take. They can cause constipation, oxidative stress. It's really gentle on the gut. What it does is it's iron binding. So what it means is that it just transports your iron around your body more effectively. So they're actually means your body can absorb it more effectively and doesn't cause that iron overload, which is, really common, as you say, with iron supplementation. So it's good for women, I would say, who menstruate heavily, chronically tired and burnt out. This iron is being depleted or prone to anemia.
So what you're saying, it's not supplementing iron as such, but it's actually making use of the iron that you have in the body better. So does that mean there shouldn't be a downside to that? There's no risk as well?
There is iron in lactoferrin. So there is, the ferrin part of the word lactoferrin. So there is a form of iron in there. But yes, it's really so much less likely that you're ever going to be able to overdose on that or take too much of that iron that's present in lactoferrin as opposed to another type of supplement. But, if you're somebody who does take an iron ferrous supplement, lactoferrin there's been a study that shows that even that then enhances the kind of ability for you to absorb the iron from that supplement. So both ways, taking it alone and with iron supplements seems to improve its absorbency in the body.
So if you are deficient in iron, you take an iron supplement and lactoferrin to use the iron better, or do you just take lactoferrin?
I guess I'm not entirely sure that would depend, I think, on how iron deficient you might be. I definitely noticed a huge difference in just taking lactoferrin alone. I do not take an iron supplement. But that said, I didn't have any kind of diagnosed deficiency of iron at all. So I'd have to double check the research on that. But I'm pretty convinced that you could just take an lactoferrin supplement on its own and it would be a really gentle way of delivering iron to your body that isn't going to.
So if for whatever reason you're not doing a blood test, either way of the spectrum, you should be okay taking lactoferrin.
I think everybody, without question, not without question actually, because some people who are perhaps on sometimes diabetes medicines perhaps should be really careful if they're taking lactoferrin, just because it is so good at your, monitoring your insulin and your glucose levels, that kind of regulating that. If you are on some kind of tablets for your diabetes, then I would just check with your doctor first. But other than that, I think that most healthy people, non-diabetic people who have normal blood sugars should definitely be taking lactoferrin. It's just, there is not, I can't even put into words just how many applications and how many ways it's absolutely amazing for you. Reducing inflammation, reducing chronic inflammation. It's helped me with poor sleep, poor mood, and there's studies behind this. It's not just my personal kind of anecdotal feedback on it. As you say, it's antioxidant. And for me, it's just one of the few molecules that supports both the immune system and energy levels, but without any overstimulation.
I had a question. It's disappeared now. But
even just to talk to that ferrin and vaginal health, obviously it really does help support the lactobacillus dominans. It's present in your vaginal mucosa anyway. And if you do get an infection, your body produces more of it. But it's something that doesn't hang around. You need to actually be quite regularly supplementing with that because it doesn't remain in the body. So yeah, I would say it's a really helpful supplement, even for women going through perimenopause, when estrogen drops and the microbiome diversity shifts. It's a really good opportunity then to start taking lactoferrin and, post antibiotics as well to restore that microbiome. It's just a really brilliant, gentle and completely natural way to restore balance.
It wouldn't necessarily restore the microbiome by itself. Obviously, you have to give probiotics, prebiotics, etc., but it would stop the population with bad bacteria, which tend to jump on any vacuum post-antibiotics that you tend to have. Okay, the question I had was, you said, obviously, if you're on diabetic medication, do check with your doctor. Obviously, the ideal scenario is if you're on something like metformin, you do not want to be on metformin long term because there's problems around B vitamin absorption, especially if you have issues in your MTHFR, any mutations around there. You already have problems with your B vitamins, so you do not want to stick metformin on top of that. And it's actually 20 to 40% of the population who have problems with the MTHFR chain. So while we're saying do check with your doctor, but this might be perhaps a good switch in the long term. Obviously, you need to be careful about how you do that and be under medical supervision. But I think it's definitely worth finding a doctor who actually understands what lactoferrin is, what it does, and other things as well. We touched on PCOS previously. And actually, if you want to talk us through that, because there's a couple of other things you can do in terms of blood sugar regulation, whether that's, again, lactoferrin, but also berberine, inositol, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, exactly. And as actually, just to speak to your point, I was somebody that was prescribed metformin. I was first diagnosed with polycystic ovary syndrome when I was 19, but quite clear to me that I had it for longer than that. I first got diagnosed with acne when I was 10 years old, started my periods really early, and started noticing hirsutism, in my really early teens. And so by 22, I was pre-diabetic, and they gave me a prescription for metformin, which my also 50-year-old dad was on for his type 2 diabetes, and I didn't tolerate it well. I actually didn't tolerate it well, but nor did I notice any improvement from taking metformin. Now, obviously, that's my own anecdotal experience with it. But what I did do is then just go on a complete deep dive into what other alternative natural or adjunct molecules or supplements that I could be taking. So yeah, that was something I noticed really quickly, that when I started experimenting with berberine, with lactoferrin, I did a bit less with inositol, actually. For me, berberine and lactoferrin were super, super incredibly powerful for me. And the research backs that up, that actually berberine, there was a clinical trial that showed that berberine was just as effective as metformin for insulin resistance, and was obviously therefore better tolerated because it's more natural. So yeah, I was doing a lot of experimenting with berberine and lactoferrin, and also weightlifting. So I do believe now that I've got most of my polycystic ovary syndrome symptoms in some really good control through kind of complete dedication to the cause. And yeah, so I'm now, maintain a healthy weight, but I work out with weights 3 times a week and have done for 14 years. I'm rigorous about taking my lactoferrin supplement. I've taken berberine before, don't currently take it. But yeah, there's some really good research coming out there about berberine and lactoferrin versus metformin in sort of insulin resistance, glucose metabolism, which obviously affects people suffering with PCOS a lot. So yeah, exciting.
And it's super interesting. So just one note on berberine, I believe that needs to be cycled in the sense that you take it for a couple of weeks and then you have an off period as well, just because it messes with your gut microbiome otherwise if you're not careful.
That's exactly what I used to do. I used to always just take a break. And same with lactoferrin, take a break after several months of taking it. Make sure you cycle it just for the exact reasons that you say.
What cadence, what frequency would you do?
So with my lactoferrin, I will probably take 2 weeks off every 3 months just to kind of like, I don't even mean to say give it a rest, but, just this, you don't want to be taking something so regularly, that your body becomes completely reliant on it. So I just take 2 weeks off every 3 months, but I'm taking 300 mgs every day in the morning before I eat. And I just cannot tell you how much it's really changed my life in terms of energy during the day, being able to sleep at night, my weight loss, and just feeling a little bit more in control of my symptoms.
And sticking with inositol, I appreciate you're not an expert on that, but what's your experience been in the sense of what is it, what are the different types, how should you use them, etc.?
So inositols actually have emerged as kind of quite well-researched and effective and safe options for polycystic ovarian syndrome, especially the subtype that's insulin resistant or might have hormonal imbalances or fertility issues. So often women are recommended to take this kind of 40-to-1 blend of myo-inositol versus D-chiro-inositol, which mimics the natural ratio in the body. And it's essentially like a vitamin-like compound. It's technically a sugar alcohol, but it does play a really crucial role in insulin signaling, ovarian function, hormone regulation. So there's been quite a number of studies with inositol with women in PCOS and all showing very positive benefits. Myo-inositol has been proven to restore ovulation and menstrual cycles in women who are suffering from polycystic ovary syndrome. So obviously they're more likely to have really long periods where they don't have a period, heavy periods. That's kind of got that regularity back. It improves insulin resistance, decreases testosterone, and the D-chiro-inositol also improves insulin sensitivity, reduces androgens. But there is some study that shows that high doses may impair ovulation if not balanced with the myo-inositol. So that's, I think, why the kind of recommendation would always be to have this kind of blend of both of the inositols. But yeah, it's really exciting in terms of obviously all the effects you might get with being someone who suffers. So high androgen levels, problems with your blood sugar and insulin sensitivity and weight gain and fertility outcomes. There's a 2020 meta-analysis concluded that the combination in 40-to-1 was more effective than metformin, which is what is prescribed when you go to the doctor and have polycystic ovary syndrome or prediabetes, but with fewer side effects.
Okay, so let's drill down into this a bit more. So we said the natural balance in the body is 40-to-1, but to my knowledge, correct me if you've seen other things, other studies, people with PCOS are actually only deficient in, or tend to be more deficient in myo-inositol. So there's this one branch that says, let's give it in the 40-to-1 ratio because that's a balance. And then there's the other branch that says we should only be supplementing what's actually deficient.
I don't know. It's not something I actually take, but I don't know. But it's really interesting. I would love to research and learn more about that, actually. As you say, often the recommendation is basing the ratio on trying to mimic, so biomimetically what's in the body. But as you say, if women with PCOS are deficient only in one side of it, I'm not sure. That's really interesting.
I'll have to dig out the appropriate guest for that. Okay, fantastic. So I've got a couple of curveball questions for you. Ready?
Yes.
So what is a book or books that you've either given the most as a gift or that had a profound impact on your life?
That's a really good one because I am obsessed with literature and reading. I'm kind of an avid reader. Probably the book I have given the most is a French book. Actually, it's called Les Années or The Years by Annie Ernaux. She won a Nobel Prize for this book. It's a beautiful, sweeping autofiction, so kind of halfway between fiction and autobiography. It's a masterpiece that charts a woman's life and collective memory across decades. And I think what makes it seminal, especially for women, is Erno weaves in like really intimate bodily phases of womanhood. There's menstruation in there, it's pregnancy, it's abortion, desire, menopause, but they're not side notes. Like, this is part of the history itself, this neglected history. And it's a beautiful book that shows like the personal is political and bodies carrying memories, resistance, and really it just shows that our cycles and our silence and our struggles for autonomy are not really private experience. They're part of collective consciousness. They're part of the public record of what it means to be a woman. And there's been recently in London, there's actually been this fantastic adaptation of this book in a play. I saw it a couple of weeks ago at the Harold Pinter Theatre, and it was very beautifully done. There was a couple of very graphic scenes where there was an abortion, and no punches were held. And actually, I'm assuming it was a man, but maybe that's kind of not very generous. But someone fainted in the audience because they were just so shocked by this. And apparently, then I read up. Apparently, this keeps happening in many of the performances of this play. Someone keeps fainting during the abortion scene. It's quite graphic, but yeah, I really love that book. Couldn't recommend it more.
And I've got medical stuff on site, I hope. Okay. Speaking of, what is an investment or what is the most worthwhile purchase that you've made in the last 2 to 3 years?
So I'm only quite a recent adopter of the Oura Ring. So I've been using the Natural Cycles app for a very long time, but I actually decided to go for the Oura Ring because it's just that kind of feeling of control over my fertility. I'm all consumed with growing my business now and launching this business, the Daughters of Mars. But I do still want to have a family. And, there's ways out there at the moment where you can prolong your ovarian health, you can prolong your fertility. And so I'm just kind of want to tap into all of the tools that are becoming available to us. So I would say my Oura Ring has been a really fantastic recent purchase that's positively impacted my life. So yeah, really highly recommend that. But I suppose more than something financial would be the investment in just finding out answers for myself, not just taking the fact that the doctor put me on the pill when I was 13 years old after 3 years of antibiotics to say, well, that would be the only thing that can deal with your polycystic ovary syndromes. It was actually thinking, well, I'm not going to really accept that. I'm going to look out for different ways of managing that. So the investment in time and research, the 14 years of weightlifting and strength training is the best investment I've ever made. Genuinely has now just one of those things that is part of my life. But I do wonder if I hadn't got polycystic ovary syndrome, would I have found fitness and weightlifting in that way? But now I'm just so glad because I've done my innings for as I sort of enter like the more mid phase of my life. So yeah, weightlifting and my fantastic Oura Ring.
The side note on weightlifting, because you probably got into it because of PCOS. But when you look at why it works against PCOS, as weightlifting grows muscle is your glucose sink, which means you're actually less insulin resistance, which brings us back full circle on one hand to the diabetes, metabolic health, but also to PCOS. So I'm definitely a woman that keeps preaching. Each and every person out there needs to do that, especially as we age. We have an episode out. Actually, there's one with Catalyst, which is EMS training. I believe it's episode number 3 or 4. So I would definitely encourage everyone to check that out. I'm a huge fan of it. EMS training is it's a very efficient form of strength and weight training, basically. And I've been using that. It became not popular, but it started in Germany sort of 15, 20 years ago. I was one of the early adopters there. And by now, this is super interesting. There's actually more branches of the most popular franchise than there are branches of McDonald's in Germany. And this tells you something.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, it's a side note on strength training base. I think you also had another secret up your sleeve, which I haven't heard before. You said it was a prescription of naltrexone, it's called?
This is something, as widely as I want to shout about lactoferrin, this is something that's a real game changer. So when startup life, has really does take its toll, really stressful. And, at the end of each day, we were all, this is no longer the case, but we were all waiting for that 5 o'clock. Okay, we need to carry on doing some work for a little longer. Let's take it to the pub and we'll carry on. And so it kind of got into this habit where we were drinking wine most nights to kind of deal with the high octane, high stress startup life. And it very quickly developed into an evening wine habit, which was, as somebody who's obsessed with my sleep and my health and really have always been very, very interested in my health, it was causing me terrible anxiety, terrible insomnia, compounding my stress. Obviously, it was making it only worse the next day, but you kind of get into this cycle. And particularly in Britain, we have a really bad culture for this. And so I was just looking for something like, I love wine, and I love kind of socializing and the positive benefits you get from socializing over a glass of wine. Not that you need that necessarily, but it does kind of instantly give you that kind of quick segue into kind of connection. So I didn't want to give up, but I did some research and found something called the Sinclair method. And what they do is prescribe you with this drug called naltrexone. Now, this is completely licensed for use in the UK, but not for alcohol. It's more for addictions such as gambling. But it's really exciting. So it's an opioid antagonist. And if you take that before you drink, essentially you might have 1 or 2 glasses of wine, but you don't get that huge surge of dopamine that you would normally get. And so it then stops at 1 or 2 glasses of wine. And you kind of lose interest in it. It's not giving you that same kick. It's not giving you that same buzz. And so it's called pharmacological extinction insofar as you drink more. The more you drink, the more you kind of don't want to drink anymore. It becomes very uninteresting. And I do think that this is something that should be far more known of. Obviously in the UK, and I'm not sure about in other countries, but, it's really, alcohol is all very much like a abstinence and sobriety model. And a lot of people are in this kind of grey area where, they know they're probably having a bit too much to drink, but they wouldn't class themselves as a problematic alcoholic. They wouldn't think that, the next step for them needed to be AA or kind of a recovery program. And just how amazingly powerful this was, I just wish it was a bit better known, because it could really help so many people that kind of feel like they're a bit stuck in a rut. And I couldn't be more highly positive about the effects it's had on me. Like, it's just completely made a huge difference, I must say.
And this is something you would use as a drug to wean yourself off, and then there's no longer a need? Or would you still take this if you go to have a drink? Or you just stop drinking because it's no longer interesting at all?
It's a bit of both. So you only take it when you're going to be drinking. So if you're going to meet some friends and likely, those are the kind of people you normally have a glass of wine with or whatever, you take it before you go and an hour beforehand, and you might have 1 or 2. And as you say, you lose interest, but you don't take it when you're not drinking. And then it's really important to do other things that kind of like give you dopamine, give you a hit, so that your body gets used to feeling that from natural sources rather than, the Gavi or whatever it might be that you drink. And so then you lose interest, and, you no longer really have to take it. You only take it when you drink. And for me, I wouldn't say it was every night, but a lot of nights of the week I would have been having a couple of glasses of wine. I can't remember the last time I had a glass of wine. It was certainly over a week ago. And that's amazing for me. Like, that's really a huge effect, and for something so simple. And I just wish it was more known, because, there's not many people I know in my circle in the culture that kind of aren't all a bit worried about how much they're drinking, particularly as they approach middle age.
And I think particularly in the UK, I mean, in my 15 years in the country, this is definitely something I've noticed a lot. Okay, that's super, super interesting. Okay, next one. What is an unusual habit or an absurd thing that you love?
Okay, I'm just thinking, I have an allotment. I don't know if this is exciting or not, but I'm absolutely obsessed with growing my own vegetables. And it's a bit of a cliche to say that it keeps me grounded, but yeah, I'm absolutely an allotmenteer. But I'm also a professional singer, so I can sort of be there in my mucky clothes, and then the next thing going out in the evening wearing a lot of sequins. So yeah, very varied life, running a startup, being a allotmenteer, and also being a professional singer. So I've sung all around the world. I still get asked to sing at exciting parties now, and kind of involved in really exciting creative projects, avant-garde projects. So I don't know if they are either surprising or absurd, but
I don't think they're either, in the sense that, for example, you're not the first person to tell me they've got an allotment on this particular podcast since I've started asking the question. So this is very, and it's slight side note, and it's less to do with women's biohacking, but definitely something I'm super interested in. I've been a biohacker for 17 years. I've got, my very first piece of furniture was an infrared sauna. I've got all the gadgets at home, right? The problem is I'm never at home. I travel the world so much because spreading the word about longevity, etc., etc. And I've had this idea. I would love to have sort of 2 free bases around the world, also to have nicer weather, really, right? As much as I love London, as much as I love Berlin, It's shit in winter, excuse my French. It's just not really nice. I want to be somewhere it's nice and south and building that. And as part of that, actually, so we're looking at different sites in Portugal at the moment for the first sort of longevity-enabled entrepreneurs, village, etc., etc. And I like ecosystems. I like integrating things. That's why I keep spinning all these things together. And there's one company of mine that I'm advising. They're called Our Greenery, and they actually do. So I have to say, I've killed many cacti in my life, right? So I'm really, I don't know, allotment is for me. I want the benefits of allotment minus of the work, plus I'm never there to actually do the work.
Yeah.
And Our Greenery basically has modular indoor farming units. It's fully automated. It grows whatever you want within 2 weeks. I can go travel. I can go to whatever it is, Dubai, New York, etc. I come back, my salads are ready, my herbs are ready, it's all there. And nothing's dead. I didn't kill anything, specifically because I wasn't there to kill anything. So that's probably a good thing. Just to come back full circle. And that's actually why I'm quite excited to see people have allotments and that this is becoming much more of a consciousness. Anyway, last question. What are you working on at the moment?
So we are working on launching the Daughters of Mars tampons, so the bioactive prebiotic tampons that deliver vaginal wellness. They're going to be launching this year. We are also creating a range of science-backed supplements for menstrual and hormonal health, completely based on biomimicry, because I'm of the belief that nature did it best first time round. And if we can find ways of mimicking that and enhancing that and extracting that and, you know, enhancing our wellness with that, that's my kind of my raison d'etre. And I suppose I want to champion a future where vaginal health is far more mainstream. It's not taboo. It's not embarrassing. You know, there's still rooms I'm in when I tell people what I'm doing, and like the physical recoil when I mention anatomically correct, medically correct terms is just palpable. I want the word vagina to kind of be very neutral.
Working on. Cool. I think that's it, actually. Thank you very much.
Wow, fantastic.
It's so lovely to have you on.
Thank you, Judith. I've really enjoyed myself. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining me on this transformative journey. Your presence in this community is truly valued. Now, you may not realize it, but your words hold immense power. They have the ability to reach others who may benefit greatly from the wisdom shared here. If you found value in what you heard, I kindly ask you to take a moment to subscribe to Biohacking Eve, leave a glowing review on your preferred podcast platform, and share Biohacking Eve with your friends and family. Your support helps spread the message of health optimization for women far and wide. Lastly, I want to express my gratitude to you for investing in yourself. By prioritizing your well-being, you serve as an inspiration to others. I'm eagerly looking forward to bringing you many more exciting episodes, and thank you for being a vital part of our community. Live long and prosper, my friend. The Biohacking Eve Health Optimization for Women podcast is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice, and no doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from this podcast is at the user's own risk. The content of this podcast is not intended to be substituted for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay obtaining medical advice for any medical condition they may have and should seek the assistance of the healthcare professionals for any such conditions. In addition, the information on this podcast does not constitute investment or financial advice.